Welcome to Reddit Aliens. Serious, what's the closest you've come to a horrible death? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
I don't know why the universe wants me dead, but here are two of mine. I've got an arrhythmia and have had it at least since I was 11. Basically, my heart messes up and misses a beat, then overcorrects and goes into tachycardia. I faint and am extraordinarily bad at a lot of cardio, but I love running. When I was 13, I hadn't yet been diagnosed. I ran track and had been for 3 years, sprints and jumps. My coach wanted me to try the mile at a meet, and I agreed to try. At the meet, I wasn't able to finish because my chest pain got so bad. That night I wasn't able to breathe well and felt like my chest was simultaneously exploding and being crushed. My mom said it must be an asthma attack, which I hadn't had before, and I was up all night. Actually, that was my first cardiac event. So, a mild heart attack at 13, struggling to breathe, terrified, and in intense pain. Before that, when I was very young, my aunt was watching me as I played outside in the rain. It was stormy. All I remember is running around and then waking up super tingly on the ground, like my whole body had fallen asleep. Either I or the ground next to me had been hit by lightning. My aunt panicked and still hasn't ever told my mom or dad, and I never have either. A few years ago, I was staying at a stranger's home in the western US, situation like an Airbnb but a different company. I actually slept in a camper outside of the main house but could use the kitchen and bathroom inside. At one point, they offered to let me sleep inside. They had an extra bedroom. I just enjoy sleeping out, so I declined. That night, there was a gas leak in the house and the entire family died. Whoa. I actually knocked on the door that morning and had to leave because nobody would let me in. That night, the police were there and told me to leave. I've done a lot of really dangerous things, but I think this is the event that most haunts me. Yeah. Man, this still haunts me. So, my friend invited me to their house, and we were just chilling when he asks me if I wanted to see his snake. I was like, yeah, sure, because 9-year-old me thought snakes were cool and edgy. He takes me out to a shed, and there's maybe a 50 centimeter by 50 centimeter and a meter deep plastic container. I knew pretty much nothing about snakes, being 9 and very, very into sharks and the ocean. So, he hands me this plastic container with holes poked in the top and tells me his snake is in it. I hesitantly pull off the top because the only other person I know who has a snake has a proper home for it, not a plastic box in a shed, and even then it was weary. I open it and a really effing pissed eastern diamondback rattlesnake jumps out at me, and I get bit on my left shoulder. The kid runs inside and calls an ambulance while I sit there in agony and the snake slithers away. I got the anti-venom I needed, and then his mother confirmed she'd never bought a snake for him, and to this day, I still have no clue how he managed to trap one in a plastic box and keep it in a shed.
That word friend, I think you're using it wrong. Either way, glad you made it out of that. Pretty wild story. Crazy.
As a 20-year-old American, I was riding a motorcycle across Vietnam like a Top Gear special. I stupidly decided that riding on Highway 1, the main trucking highway from HCM City to Hanoi at night in the rain was a good idea. At one point, I was riding and I could see 2 headlights in the oncoming lane blinding me with their high beams. Then all of a sudden, the 2 headlights turn into 4 as a bus is passing the truck coming head on at me. I try my best to swerve off onto the shoulder, but I'm being blinded by both their high beams, and I have rain hitting me in the eyes. I end up getting over just enough, and the bus came probably an inch from hitting me head on. Sat down on a bench to have a smoke after asking a friend who had hooked up with a random if it was okay if I get the taxi as I was on my own. First taxi spotted, they jumped in and left me after a night out. Boyfriend troubles at the time, so stupid me thought it was sensible to walk just into a park and sit on a seat just inside to contemplate him, boyfriend, being an arsehole. Random guy came and tried to talk to me. Got a weird vibe as he wouldn't take no for an answer. He started hitting me, strangling me, and dragged me into the bushes. Had a weird out-of-body experience, so guessed I was dying. Hadn't realized I had been screaming. People in houses nearby heard me and phoned the police. Group of 5 random men heard me as they were coming home and pulled him off of me. He tells them I was his girlfriend and we were having a fight. I tell them I've never seen him before. He tries to run. They accidentally trip him many times. Police arrive. I end up naked in the police station, taking my clothes off for evidence and getting photographed. Then the coroner's office the next day after the police took me back to the scene to collect stuff that had fallen out of my pockets during the struggle. Told by the extent of Patachi that I was about 20 seconds away from death. Those guys were given £100 reward each for public service. A couple couldn't collect as they had some sort of outstanding police warrants, which was a shame. They deserve that reward. Always pisses me off watching movies where people are strangled. I looked like a beetroot. My entire face was purple with burst blood vessels. My eyes were completely bloodshot, bruised finger marks all over my neck. He was a newly married naval officer with a 9-month-old child. He got dishonorably discharged, lost his pension, and got sent to Colchester Armed Forces Prison in the UK. I had to sit with him and his family while waiting to go into court. Only time I fainted in my life, in the witness box. Effed up my A-levels. Really don't think I'd like to go through that again. I had a stint in college where it was really a bad place, and my drink got extremely out of hand with it. Every time I drank, I'd wake up the next morning to a pile of vomit next to my bed with no recollection of doing so. Eventually, I just habitually left a bucket there. One morning I woke up and my mouth was full of it, and it had clearly been in my mouth for a long time, as I had gotten so drunk that I didn't even roll over or wake up, etc. I have no clue how I didn't choke on it and suffocate in my sleep, but I stopped drinking for quite a while after that. Sometime in 2011, I was out running early in the morning and suddenly got a headache. Didn't think much of it and just cut my run short. When I got back from work, my wife expressed concern that I had a headache all day and asked me to go to sick call in the morning if I still had it. I was in the military at the time. The next day I went to sick call and managed to get the one doctor to ever read my file. She said it was strange that in the 6 years I'd been enlisted, I had only been to sick call once, and that had led to surgery. So, said I should go get a CAT scan to be on the safe side, and I had no objections. My wife insisted on coming, even though I tried to explain it was most likely nothing to be worried about. We get to the other hospital. I have the scan done, and we get placed in a waiting room. While I'm waiting, a nurse brings me a pill cocktail to help with the pain. Up until this point, I hadn't taken anything. I've never liked taking pills. I have a very low tolerance to most things, and they tend to make me feel strange. I'm about to accept this when another nurse just about dives through the curtain and slaps the cup out of the other nurse's hand while shouting, "No!" Turns out, my brain was bleeding, and the medication I was about to take would have made it so much worse. Less than 20 minutes later, I was strapped to a board and driven to the nearest naval hospital, where I was knocked out and given a tube that ran from my leg into my head. The doctor who was there when I woke up had been chatting with my wife. Apparently, if the sick call doc hadn't decided something was a little weird, it was likely I would have died. If the nurse had let me take that medication, it was likely I would have died. If I had taken anything for my headache the first day, it was likely I would have died. As it is, I was ambulatory after about a month and able to go home at around 7 weeks. I was lethargic and unable to perform anything other than light duty that involved a lot of sitting down for about a year after, and of course, this was the end of my military career. After about a year, I started to get back my energy again, and once that started, it only really took a month to get back to about where I was prior to the bleed. But it was a little troubling just how many normal things could have happened that day that would have killed me. Silver linings, though. As far as doctors can tell, I escaped without any long-term effects, and the neurologist has told me that I am almost certainly going to have another, and that one is likely to end me. No idea when that'll happen, but I'm assured that it'll be painless. Knowing this has allowed me to pursue a lot of hobbies that I once thought were too dangerous. It just seems that knowing how it's likely to end makes me feel like it's unlikely to end any other way. I was living in Africa at the time. I was staying with a family native to the country, but they were connected with the group I was with, to get the real way of living over there. Anyways, every house is gated off with 12-foot gates and fences around their properties. I had come home one evening, later, like 2 a.m. I was picking up a friend from the airport. I enter through the gate door. I had a key, obviously. The walk from the gate to the fence door is about 100 feet, 33 yards or 30.48 meters. Well, they have guard dogs. At first, they barked to let the homeowner know someone was there. Now, mind you, I had only lived there for like 3 weeks, so they knew me, but not well. I start walking slowly. The dogs get more aggressive with their barks. I know from early childhood not to run, to not show fear. I'm slowly walking, keeping my hands up. I'm about halfway at this point. They're now starting to sniff and bite at my pant legs. What felt like a full-on American football field length away, I finally reached my door, locked, of course. They're getting more aggressive. I'm like, is this how I die? To dogs eating me in Africa? I fumbled my keys around and, not trying to drop them, unlocked the door and get inside. I did not sleep. I was so happy just to be breathing and alive. In 2006, when I was 7 years old, I went over to the park with my older brother. He would have been 9. Back then, he had a bit of an obsession with those for sale signs, and if he found them dumped anywhere, he'd bring it back home. We found one, but it had some concrete at the end of the wooden pole, and we couldn't pick it up. Keep in mind that this is just down the hill from our house, literally not even a minute away. I didn't want to go and get my mum by myself, but I didn't want to stay alone with the sign either. We argued, and he ran up the hill and across the quiet road to get our mum. Another thing to keep in mind, we live on a council estate in the UK, so this was hardly a road that saw tons of traffic, and the speed limit was 30 miles per hour. That's about 48 kph for your Americans. I followed him and didn't stop before crossing the road. I just ran right out. Right into the side of a 7-seater estate car. My leg got lodged by the tire, and the car ran my leg over before flinging me back onto the pavement. I ended up with multiple open fractures in my leg and needed a few surgeries to fix it. My tibia and fibula bones in my right leg actually ended up fusing together during the healing process, and the doctors decided this wasn't going to cause any harm. Luck was definitely on my side that day. Had I been a few seconds faster, I would have run right in front of that car, and I was a tiny 7-year-old. No way would I have survived, even despite the fact that the driver was going just under the speed limit. It also just so happened that I was wearing some thick jeans and brown faux leather cowboy boots. This was the early 2000s. They had to cut the boots and jeans off of my body, and it turns out the damage would have been a lot more severe if I'd been wearing less clothing. Had a pneumothorax last month, first one. Went to emergency at local hospital full of COVID-19 potential cases. Doctor told me they had to operate me next day, and when I asked if there was any risk, they told me absolutely none. We never missed an operation like that, and we'll be doing it with the help of the latest technology scanner. It will take us like 10 minutes, and you'll feel immediately relieved or better after. That gave me a lot of morphine for the pain, and in the morning during the operation, I heard something like, "Oh shit, he's doing a hemography. We need to send him to the other clinic in emergency." Kept me waiting 1 hour 30 minutes while internally bleeding and suffocating in my own blood before the ambulance arrived for the transfer. The doc at the second hospital yelled, "I want him in the block immediately," when I arrived, and he saved my life, I guess. And that's a very summarized version of what happened. Sorry for my English mistakes. I'm French. Oui. So this isn't a physical time I was close to death, but the one time in my life that I know, had I made a different decision, I would have been murdered. I was early 20s and married to a soldier, small children stationed away from home. Many military spouses have a hard time adjusting to life away from home states. I managed to settle in pretty well, thankfully, and made numerous friends who inevitably become like family away from family. The bonding of spouses that are almost always at some point left home while the soldier spouses go away for deployments or training for extended period of time. Thankfully, I made friends, so thankful. As my husband at the time was sent to schooling, I began to prepare for 90 days alone with my kids. It's not at all uncommon for family readiness groups to call and reach out to lower-ranking families when a soldier goes away. Usually it's a great asset to have in case of emergency, and each spouse had a roster of the chain of command hanging somewhere in their home to reach out in the event of emergencies, which is how, I'm sure, this entire ordeal happened to me. The roster and my number being on it, this particular time, my husband went away for specialized training, and the other troops in his unit remained home. So about a week in, I got a phone call. It went something like this. Him. "Hello, Mrs. Tim's wife 716, this is Sergeant so-and-so. Your husband asked me to watch out for you and check in on you while he was gone. Just calling to see how you're doing and if there's anything at all I can do for you. Do you need anything? Me. Hi, thanks, I'm great. And all set. Lots of friends here. Thanks again for calling to ask. Him. Okay, well, I know you have several children. So do my wife and I. Noticed the introduction of a spouse, which should have made me feel safe, but still thought it was strange for some reason. We get WIC, so if you need some extra milk, I can bring it over, not a problem. Me. Thanks. And that was that. I hung up, but made a mental note to tell my husband when he called how nice it was of Sergeant so-and-so to do that, so he could thank him. The day finally comes that my husband calls, and I mention the call from Sergeant so-and-so. I was met with a brief silence, and then a very emphatic, I would never ask that guy to check on you. Still, although strange, I figured he may have been calling for nefarious reasons, such as hooking up behind our spouse's back or something like that. Yes, it happens. Never, not ever, would I have imagined the reason. I know, and would find out later that he called not in a million years. Fast forward to a few months into the future. There's a whole bunch of police, both military and civilian, present at the family housing near me. At first, I had no idea what for, but when news finally started coming out, I was left frozen in horror. Turns out, Sergeant so-and-so had murdered a young girl working at a nearby restaurant. I'm trying to be as vague as possible to protect victims of his. He went in uniform with his actual name tag on, posing as someone who was in a position to help her achieve something that would make her either famous or lots of money. He had either buried evidence in the backyard or burnt it in his fire pit in the backyard. The exact details are a bit fuzzy because at the time I was so horrified. I truly had a hard time reading or listening to the details. I just knew, finally, why he called me. I had no doubts about it. I believe still to this day that he was searching for victims, and I was a potential victim. I immediately remembered what he told me about having a spouse and children, and grabbed the roster with the names and numbers on it and called his wife. Not to tell her, just to check on her and offer help if she needed it. Kind of the opposite of why I believe he called me. But I just had to try and help her. She answered and thanked me, in the same fashion I thanked him, and never did need any help. Still, to this day, about 20 years later, I just know had I told him I needed anything, I would have been his victim. I still occasionally look it up in the news and check if there is any new information about him, such as release from prison, or any new crimes they have found out he committed. And as far as I can tell, he is still in prison, where I hope he remains until he dies. I do think of the poor young girl he murdered each time I look it up or think of it.
There was an old saying in the military. It's crass, but it is what it is. It says, trust me with your life, not your money or your wife. This takes that to a whole new level. Crazy. Glad you made it out okay.
Picture a giant iron cauldron flipped over so that its spiky feet are pointing up in the air. Imagine it under a rope hanging from a treehouse. I was in this treehouse and got on the rope to climb down, but the rope broke when I got all my weight on it. Fell straight down, flat on my back onto the dirt. A few minutes earlier, I had moved the cauldron thinking I wanted to swing on the rope, but climbed up into the treehouse instead. Still kind of freaks me out when I think about the whole sequence of events. I hit the ground so hard that the wind was knocked out of me and I couldn't move for a few seconds. I would have died of a broken back for sure if the cauldron would have still been there. I almost drowned while tubing down a river. I was in college when this happened. Was with friends who were pretty drunk off tequila, but I was sober. I was swimming the river because we only had 3 tubes and there were 5 of us, and I was just ahead of my friends in the tubes. We were just about to reach the end when the back of my bikini top got caught on a stick in the river. As I was scrambling to get it unhooked, my friend's tube floated on top of me and got stuck on the same log or stick, holding me under the water. I began to freak out more, causing the stick to tear up my back pretty badly. All I can remember thinking was my best friend's name, who was also sober, and hoping that she had noticed what happened as she was swimming behind the tubes. Maybe a minute went by and my lungs were really burning before my best friend came to my rescue and untied the back of my bikini, freeing me. I just remember swimming madly to the dock at the end of the river like 15 feet away and jumping out of the water onto land. I coughed up so much water and as soon as I was out of the water, my friends screamed at the blood dripping down my back, even though I couldn't feel the cuts at that point due to all the adrenaline. Needless to say, I'm not close with my friends who were drunk that day, but I do credit my best friend with saving my life. I still have a couple of scars on my back from the branch. Also, the bikini was ruined, but I'm glad to be alive. Well, this is potentially a little off topic. It's not so much the closest I've been to death, but the most danger I've ever put myself in. I climbed up a mountain peak, the Chimney Tops in Tennessee. It's around 200 feet of exposed rock to the top of a mountain, and it was a hot, sunny summer day. My hands started to burn from the rock, and I almost slipped off. It curves a little bit, but so for most of the climb you're over a pretty long fall, then a tumble to certain death. Once the adrenaline kicked in though, I felt one of the strangest sensations I've ever felt. I was feeling pain, but it didn't bother me. Everything got quiet, and I could feel my heartbeat. I heard the soft wind blowing past my ears, and I became hyper-focused on the current task of climbing up this rock face. I was able to climb all the way to the top, and then all the way back down a few minutes later. The adrenaline rush gradually faded as I walked down the trail. Eventually, I had to stop and dip my hands in a cold mountain stream along the trail because the pain of the burns was starting to get to me. I had mild burns on my hands from the rocks, but a few burns were worth it for the view alone and survival. To put this event into context, I was, and still am, an autistic kid put into a small autism school located in a mall. It was absolute hell. There was one incident where I got hurt fairly badly, but it probably couldn't have been lethal. Another incident, however, could have potentially killed me, if not for the sub, Ish. He was at the school all the time. Basically, I was nearly strangled. Specifically, I was in my journalism class, and as usual, everyone was talking over the video, and also as usual, I was yelling at them to stop. Eventually, one kid, note that I'm probably one of the weakest kids in the school, got up from the couch he was sitting on, ran over to me, and clenched his hands around my neck. It wasn't like we were enemies. In fact, we got along pretty damn well. But then again, it was an autism school. Thankfully, the previously mentioned sub Ish came over and got him off of me. It was not a good day. I was out hiking in a very remote part of the woods. I walked up to a large rock near the edge of a ravine. I was unaware it had rained a few days ago, and the ground was still moist, great word, and the ground underneath the rock gave out. I remember starting to fall, and then my memory goes black. The next thing I remembered was going in and out of consciousness and being dragged on some type of sled. The next full memory I had, I was laying on the ground next to a makeshift sled adjacent to my car. I was seriously injured, but someone called the police and fire department to check on me. For some reason, they collected DNA from the ropes used to pull the sled and run it through the database. I got a call a week later from a detective asking if anything else happened. I said no and asked why. The detective informed me that DNA came back to a suspect of multiple murders. I would say I was very lucky the guy did not kill me. I visited my native village, basically where many generations preceding my father lived. My father was also born there, which lies in the Himalayas last summer. Though I visited it before, but this time we stayed for a few days as my parents reconstructed their ancestral home. So my father and uncle took the whole family to the farming land that used to belong to my grandparents. But just at the start of the land, there was a very narrow path with one side being a void. My father and uncle had gone ahead, and my mother and aunt had sit down to rest with my cousins, so I crossed it alone. But I did it. After a while, father and uncle were climbing down the hill while all others were going through the easier path. When I tried to climb down, I slipped and was about to fall down before my uncle held me. Though it wouldn't have been that dangerous due to terraces, but suddenly a realization struck me that what if I would have slipped when I was crossing that path alone? I would have killed myself falling from a mountain. There was another incident where I met a horrible accident when I just turned 7, but that doesn't seem that horrible as I literally do not remember feeling anything. Not even that day after the accident, I remembered any actual pain or any bad feeling. So that would have been not that bad as falling off a effing cliff. An ex stole my cats when I broke up with him, dick, and was threatening to take them to the Humane Society to have them put to sleep in the morning. Whoa. The police department was closed, so I spent the night calling around to figure out where he took them. Eventually, I went over to his mother's house, and when I looked in the window, I saw them. But it was dark, and it seemed like no one was home. I broke the window with the wrench part of my car tire iron and climbed in to collect my cats, only to turn and see his sister pointing a gun at me. Whoa. She was so pissed and kept threatening to kill me, and I told her I would pay for the damages immediately. I also explained to her about the cats while she kept screaming how she was going to kill me. Eventually, she calmed down and stopped yelling, but still kept pointing the gun at me and seemed like she wanted to do it. Trying to defuse the situation, I told her the gun was actually kind of awesome, and if I knew she had one, I would have loved to go shooting with her, and maybe we could meet up tomorrow, go to the range, and catch up on all of this. She said, okay. Well, I noped the F out of there and ghosted their whole family. Oh, what in the Florida was that story?